In 490 BC, Athens needed help. A massive Persian army had just landed on Greek shores, and if Athens fell, all of Greece would follow. They needed their strongest allies, the Spartans, and they needed them fast. So they sent one man, a runner named Pheidippides. His mission? Run 150 miles from Athens to Sparta, through mountains, across valleys, in scorching heat, and do it in under 2 days. No food, no rest, no stopping. He did it in 36 hours. And here's the crazy part. For Spartans, this wasn't exceptional. This was standard. Every Spartan warrior was trained to cover impossible distances at speeds that would break modern ultramarathoners. This is the story of how Spartans could run 150 miles in 2 days and why they trained to do something so brutal. Why Spartans needed endurance. Before we talk about how they did it, we need to understand why. Because Spartans weren't running marathons for fun or fitness. They were running for survival. Ancient Greece had no phones, no internet, no telegraph. If you needed to communicate with another city-state, you sent a runner. And if that message was urgent, like, "A million Persians just invaded," that runner needed to be fast. But Sparta had an additional problem. They were surrounded by enemies and enslaved helots who outnumbered them 10 to 1. If a helot rebellion started or an enemy army approached, Sparta needed to know immediately. They couldn't wait days for a message to arrive. They needed information in hours. So Sparta created a system of elite runners who could cover enormous distances faster than anyone else in the ancient world. These weren't professional athletes. They were warriors who could fight at the end of their run. They were soldiers who could deliver messages and then join the battle. The training started young. Like everything Spartan, the training for this insane endurance started in the agoge at age 7. Spartan boys didn't just train to fight. They trained to run. Every single day. But not on tracks or level ground. They ran through the mountains of Laconia, rocky, uneven, brutal terrain where one wrong step could break an ankle. They ran barefoot, always, because boots were a luxury, and Spartans needed to develop feet that could handle any terrain without protection. Their soles became so thick and calloused that they could run across sharp rocks without flinching. They ran in the heat of summer when temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They ran in winter when their breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Weather didn't matter. The message had to get through regardless of conditions. And here's the part that modern endurance athletes would find insane. They ran on minimal food. Not because they wanted to, because that was the reality of ancient warfare. You couldn't always guarantee meals during campaigns, so Spartans learned to function on almost nothing. The physiology of Spartan endurance. Modern scientists who study the remains of ancient Spartans have found something remarkable. Their leg bones were significantly denser and stronger than those of other ancient Greeks. Their skeletal structure shows adaptations to constant long-distance running from childhood. But it wasn't just bones. Spartan training created cardiovascular systems adapted to extreme endurance. Modern ultramarathon runners talk about hitting the wall around mile 20, that point where your body runs out of easy energy and has to switch to burning fat. For Spartans, that wall came much later, if at all, because their bodies had been trained from age 7 to function in that metabolic state. They also developed what modern athletes call running economy, the ability to maintain pace with minimal energy expenditure. Watch a Kenyan distance runner, and you'll see economy. Smooth, efficient movement with no wasted motion. Spartans achieved this through thousands of hours of practice on rough terrain where inefficient movement meant injury. The mental component. But physical training alone doesn't explain how Spartans could run 150 miles in 2 days. The real secret was psychological. From childhood, Spartans were taught that pain was temporary, but honor was eternal. They were taught that their individual comfort meant nothing compared to the mission. They were taught that stopping, quitting, or failing was not an option ever. This wasn't motivational rhetoric. This was cultural programming so deep that it overrode normal human survival instincts. When a Spartan's body screamed to stop, to rest, to quit, his mind said no. The message must get through. Sparta depends on it. Stopping is not acceptable. Modern psychology calls this mental toughness, and it's considered one of the most important factors in endurance sports. Spartans didn't have a term for it. They just called it being Spartan, the technique. So how exactly did they do it? What was the physical technique that allowed 150-mile runs? First, pace. Spartans didn't sprint. They maintained a steady pace that modern runners would recognize as somewhere between a jog and a run, probably around 8 to 10 miles per hour on flat ground, slower on hills. At that pace, covering 150 miles in 36 hours becomes mathematically possible. That's about 4.2 miles per hour average, accounting for the mountainous terrain and brief rest stops. Second, breathing. Ancient sources describe Spartans using rhythmic breathing patterns synchronized with their footfalls. Modern distance runners do the same thing. It's one of the most efficient ways to maintain oxygen flow during extended exertion. Third, form. Spartan runners maintained an upright posture with minimal upper body movement. All the energy went into the legs. The torso stayed stable. This is exactly what modern running coaches teach, because it's the most efficient way to cover distance. The route. Athens to Sparta. The actual route Pheidippides took is still debated by historians. But we know the general path. North from Athens, through the mountains, across valleys, eventually reaching Sparta in the southern Peloponnese. The terrain was brutal. Not a flat marathon course, not even trails. In many places, it was barely more than goat paths winding through rocky mountains. Elevation changes of thousands of feet, heat during the day, cold at night, and Pheidippides had to navigate all of it without GPS, without marked trails, in some sections without even moonlight to see by. He relied on memory, landmarks, and Spartan training that had taught him to read terrain even in darkness. The message. When Pheidippides finally reached Sparta after 36 hours of running, he didn't collapse dramatically like in the movies. He delivered his message to the Spartan leaders. Athens needs help. The Persians have landed. We need your warriors. The Spartans' response was disappointing. They were in the middle of a religious festival and couldn't march until it ended. But that's a different story. What matters here is that Pheidippides then turned around and ran 150 miles back to Athens to deliver the Spartan response. And when the Battle of Marathon happened days later, he fought in it. Think about that. 300 miles of running, then participating in one of history's most famous battles. That was a normal week for an elite Spartan runner. How they built superhuman endurance. So how did Sparta create warriors who could do this? Let's break down the actual training methods they used. Phase 1. Childhood Foundation. Age 7 to 12. When Spartan boys entered the agoge at age 7, running wasn't an optional activity. It was survival training disguised as exercise. Every morning, before combat training, before weapons practice, before anything else they ran. 5 to 10 miles minimum, not on tracks. Through the Pheidippides mountains surrounding Sparta, where the terrain was unforgiving and dangerous. But here's what made Spartan running training different from every other culture. They didn't run to build endurance. They ran to complete missions. One boy would be given a message, sometimes just a colored stone or a piece of cloth, and told to deliver it to a specific location miles away. The other boys would be sent to stop him. This wasn't a friendly game. The runners tackled each other. They fought. They had to learn to run while being pursued, to navigate while exhausted, to protect their message, no matter what. This created a completely different mental framework. They weren't running for exercise. They were running because the mission depended on it. That psychological difference matters enormously when you're trying to cover 150 miles without stopping. Phase 2. Teenage intensification, age 13 to 17. As boys became teenagers, the distances increased dramatically. Historical records mention Spartan teenagers completing runs of 40 to 50 miles in training. Not occasionally, regularly. Once or twice a week, They would be sent on extended runs that took them deep into the mountains or to distant locations. And here's the brutal part. They were given minimal food before these runs. Sometimes none at all. The instructors wanted them to learn to function while their bodies were depleting glycogen stores, while hunger set in, while every instinct screamed to stop and eat. This is when their bodies underwent the most significant adaptations. Their muscles learned to efficiently burn fat for fuel. Their cardiovascular systems developed the capacity to deliver oxygen continuously for hours. Their mental resilience hardened like bronze in a forge. But the training wasn't just about running. They had to navigate. They were given destinations, but no maps, no guides. They had to use the sun, stars, landmarks, and memory to find their way. Getting lost added miles, and time failure was not acceptable. Phase 3, Adult Mastery, age 18 to 30. By the time a Spartan completed the Agoj at age 20, he could run 50 miles without particular difficulty. But the training didn't stop there. Adult Spartan warriors continued to practice long-distance running throughout their careers. These weren't leisurely jogs. They were conducted at near maximum sustainable pace. The distances got longer. The conditions got harder. Some training runs were conducted in full armor, about 60 pounds of bronze. Because in real warfare, you might need to march 30 miles to battle, fight for hours, then march back. Your endurance had to extend beyond running alone. The nutrition strategy. Now let's talk about something modern. Endurance athletes obsess over: nutrition. How did Spartans fuel these impossible runs? The truth is, they didn't. At least not the way modern athletes do. Modern ultramarathon runners consume thousands of calories during long races. Energy gels, bars, electrolyte drinks. Spartans had none of that. They had what they could carry, which usually meant dried figs, high natural sugar fire, barley cakes, complex carbohydrates, a small amount of cheese, protein, and fat. Water mixed with vinegar for hydration and to kill bacteria. That's it. Maybe 500 to 1,000 calories total for a 150-mile run that would burn 15,000 to 20,000 calories. So how did they survive? Their bodies had adapted to function in a severe caloric deficit. From childhood, they had trained in a semi-starved state. Their metabolism was incredibly efficient at extracting energy from limited food and then switching to burning body fat when food ran out. Modern science has a term for this: metabolic flexibility. It's considered one of the most important adaptations for endurance. Most modern people lose it because we eat constantly. Spartans never lost it because they trained hungry. The pacing secret. Here's something crucial that most people miss. Spartans didn't try to run fast. They tried to run sustainable. Modern analysis of the Pheidippides run suggests he averaged about 4 miles per hour overall, accounting for mountainous terrain and brief stops. That's barely faster than a brisk walk on flat ground. But maintaining that pace for 36 hours straight through mountains is exponentially harder than running 6-minute miles for a marathon. The challenge isn't speed, it's sustainability. Spartans were masters of finding the pace they could maintain indefinitely. They would start runs at a pace that felt almost too slow. But they knew that in hour 20, hour 30, hour 36, that slow pace would be the only pace they could maintain. Modern ultramarathon strategy teaches exactly this. Start slower than you think you should. The pace that feels easy at mile 5 will feel impossible at mile 100. Spartans understood this 2,500 years ago. Sleep deprivation training. Here's something brutal that modern athletes rarely train for: running while sleep deprived. A 150-mile run in 36 hours means you're running through at least one night, probably parts of 2. You're fighting sleep deprivation on top of physical exhaustion. Spartans trained for this specifically. They would be sent on multi-day exercises where sleep was minimal or prohibited entirely. They learned to function effectively while their minds were foggy, while hallucinations crept in at the edges of their vision, while their bodies screamed for rest. This is perhaps the most underestimated aspect of ancient Spartan endurance. Modern military special forces train for this too. Navy SEALs go through Hell Week with minimal sleep because combat doesn't stop when you're tired. Spartans understood this 2,500 years earlier. The role of competition. Spartans were intensely competitive, and they used that competitive nature to push endurance to extremes. Warriors would challenge each other to longer and longer runs. I ran to Tegea and back. Well, I ran to Argos. I ran to Olympia and returned the same day. This wasn't bragging, though. Spartans did enjoy demonstrating superiority. It was systematic pushing of human limits. Each generation tried to exceed the previous generation's achievements. This is how you get to the point where a 150-mile run becomes difficult but doable rather than impossible. When your culture has been doing 100-mile runs for generations, adding 50 more miles is just incremental progression. Injury prevention and recovery. With all this extreme running, you'd expect Spartans to have constant injuries, stress fractures, torn tendons, destroyed knees. But archaeological evidence suggests they had remarkably few running-related injuries. How? First, they ran barefoot or with minimal sandals. This forced them to develop natural running form, with forefoot striking the way humans evolved to run. Modern running shoes actually encourage heel striking, which creates more impact and more injuries. Second, they varied their terrain constantly, running on rocks, sand, dirt, grass. All of it strengthens different muscles and prevents overuse injuries. Third, they incorporated massive amounts of walking. Between intense running sessions, they walked constantly. This kept their cardiovascular systems active while allowing muscular recovery. Fourth, they used hot baths and cold water immersion, the ancient version of modern ice baths and heat therapy that elite athletes use today. The Spartan advantage over modern runners. Here's something fascinating. Modern ultramarathon world records are impressive, but they're set on flat, measured courses with aid stations every few miles. The runners have support crews, medical teams, perfect nutrition. Spartans ran through mountains without support, while hungry, often while armed, sometimes in armor. And they did it as just another part of being a warrior, not as their only focus. If you could transport a trained Spartan warrior to a modern 100-mile ultramarathon with proper nutrition and a flat course, there's a legitimate argument they would dominate, because they trained for something much harder than what modern courses offer. The Battle of Marathon Connection. Let's return to Pheidippides and the Persian invasion, because this is where the story gets even more impressive. After running 150 miles to Sparta in 36 hours and receiving their response, Pheidippides ran 150 miles back to Athens. That's 300 miles in less than a week. Then, days later, he fought in the Battle of Marathon, one of the most important battles in human history. The Athenians and their allies faced a Persian force that outnumbered them significantly. The battle lasted hours. It was brutal. Close quarters combat in the August heat. Athens won. The Persians retreated to their ships, and the Athenian generals needed someone to run back to Athens another 26 miles to announce the victory before the Persian fleet could sail around and attack the undefended city. They chose Pheidippides. Again, he ran the 26 miles from Marathon to Athens, delivered his message, "We have won," and then collapsed and died. This is the run that the modern marathon commemorates. But everyone forgets that this was his third major run in 1 week, after fighting in a battle, after 300 miles of prior running. That's not a story about one man's exceptional ability. That's a story about what Spartan training could create. Other famous Spartan runs. Pheidippides wasn't unique. History records numerous examples of Spartans covering impossible distances. During the Peloponnesian War, Spartan runners regularly carried messages between Sparta and their armies campaigning in northern Greece routes of 100+ miles through hostile territory. There are accounts of Spartan scouts running ahead of armies to gather intelligence, then running back with reports 50 to 60 miles in a day while avoiding enemy patrols. One source mentions a Spartan runner who covered 120 miles in under 24 hours to warn of an approaching enemy army, then turned around and ran back as part of the military response. These weren't athletes. These were soldiers for whom extreme endurance was just another tool in their military arsenal. Why this mattered strategically. Fast, reliable communication was a massive strategic advantage in ancient warfare. Most ancient armies moved slowly, maybe 10 to 15 miles per day, with all their equipment. If an enemy army was approaching, you might have only days or hours to respond. But if you had runners who could cover 100+ miles in a day or two, you could detect enemy movements much earlier, coordinate with allies across long distances, receive critical intelligence before battles, send reinforcements or warnings rapidly. Sparta's runner system gave them an information advantage that was almost impossible to counter. While other armies were blindly marching, hoping their scouts would return with news, Sparta knew exactly where their enemies were, what they were doing, and what they planned. This is why Sparta, despite having one of the smallest populations of any major Greek city-state, was able to dominate Greek military affairs for centuries. They saw threats coming before anyone else did. The decline of Spartan running culture. As Sparta declined in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, this running culture faded. Why? Because maintaining it required the complete social system that Sparta had built. The agoge, the constant training, the cultural values that made extreme endurance normal rather than exceptional. When Sparta stopped enforcing the agoge strictly, when they allowed wealth and comfort to creep into their society, when they stopped training boys from age 7 in brutal conditions, the superhuman endurance disappeared within a generation. You can't maintain extreme physical capability without extreme training. The Spartans knew this. They built their entire society around it. When that society changed, the abilities it created vanished. Modern attempts to replicate it. Today, ultra-endurance athletes try to replicate what Spartans did routinely, and they struggle. The current world record for 24-hour running is about 188 miles, set in 2023 on a flat track with perfect conditions, support crews, and unlimited nutrition. That's impressive. But it's only 25% more than what Pheidippides did 2,500 years ago through mountains with minimal food while carrying a message of war. Modern militaries train elite units in extreme endurance. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon. They all do 50+ mile ruck marches with heavy packs as part of selection. But even these elite soldiers consider such distances exceptional. For Spartans, it was standard. What modern athletes can learn. There are real lessons here for anyone interested in endurance. Lesson 1. Start young. Spartans developed their endurance base in childhood. Modern endurance coaches are discovering the same thing. Athletes who start young develop advantages that can't be replicated by starting as adults. Lesson 2. Train hungry. Modern athletes are discovering that training in a fasted state improves metabolic flexibility, the exact adaptation Spartans developed by training on minimal food. Lesson 3. Mental resilience matters more than physical. The difference between good endurance athletes and great ones is mostly mental. Spartans understood this 2,500 years ago and built their training around developing unbreakable mental toughness. Lesson 4. Consistency over intensity. Spartans didn't do occasional heroic efforts. They ran constantly, year after year, building a base so deep that extreme distances became routine. Lesson 5. Purposeful training. Spartans didn't run to exercise. They ran to complete missions. That psychological frame matters enormously. Modern athletes perform better when they have a clear purpose beyond just covering distance. The bigger picture. But let's zoom out and ask, why does any of this matter 2,500 years later? Because it shows what humans are capable of when capability matters enough. Spartans could run 150 miles in 2 days because their survival depended on it. Their military effectiveness depended on it. Their entire culture was built around creating warriors who could do things that seemed impossible. Modern humans have lost most of these capabilities, not because we've evolved to be weaker, but because we don't need them anymore. We have cars, phones, delivery services. We've outsourced physical capability to technology, but the potential is still there. The same genetic material that created Spartan warriors exists in modern humans. What's missing is the training, the culture, the necessity that forged that genetic potential into superhuman ability. Conclusion. So how did Spartans run 150 miles in 2 days with no food? They trained for it from age 7. They developed bodies adapted to extreme endurance and minimal nutrition. They built mental toughness that overrode normal human limits. They practiced constantly until impossible distances became routine. But more than that, they created a culture where such feats weren't exceptional, they were expected. Where running 150 miles wasn't a world record attempt, deserving of headlines. It was just another day's work. For a Spartan warrior, Pheidippides wasn't superhuman. He was just Spartan. And for a Spartan, running further than any modern athlete while hungry and exhausted was simply what you did when your city needed you. That's the real lesson of Spartan endurance. Human limits aren't fixed. They're determined by necessity, training, and culture. When all three align, humans can achieve things that seem impossible. The Spartans proved it by running distances that still impress us 2,500 years later. Not because they were genetically different, not because they had better technology, but because they trained harder, started younger, and built a society that demanded superhuman ability from every warrior. That's what it took to run 150 miles in 2 days. That's what it meant to be Spartan.